welcome to What's My Tagline. I'm your host, Carol Flagg. Thanks for tuning in. On this show, we put our microphone in front of a variety of industry experts to understand the factors influencing messaging, branding, and reputation in healthcare. You can follow the conversation on Twitter at #What'sMyTagline and follow me at Carol Flagg. My guests today are national sales trainer, speaker, and author of The Perfect Close, James Muir, and Jane Bogue, the Chief Growth Officer at Xtelligent Media. On this episode, we will discuss prospecting in the technology era. Do smartphones, email, social media, and automated voicemail make prospecting more challenging or offer more opportunity? James, Jane, thank you for joining me today.
It's great to be on, Carol. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Carol.
Yeah. So my first question, I've already warned you ahead of time of all my guests, is if you had to describe yourself as a tagline, what would it be? James, we'll start with you.
I've actually had the pleasure of creating these taglines for a number of my clients. So for me and in areas of sales and selling, my tagline would be, I make the complex simple. I think sales shouldn't be complicated. In fact, it should be easy. But I think a lot of times we make it complex by bringing in our own unnecessary baggage into the mix, and so a lot of times we make it harder than it needs to be.
That's a great tagline. Jane, what about you?
Oh, I like James's tagline. Can I just borrow that one?
Well, only if you can improve upon it, and I think that would be a challenge.
But I've got two. I mean, one, I think I live by is enthusiasm sells. On the flip side, from a sales management perspective, it's make it happen. We are, sales is the most transparent function in any organization. We've got to drive results and really deliver on behalf of our peers and the organization as a whole.
Talking about prospecting in the era of technology, I'd love to learn a little bit about your backgrounds and how you got to where you are today. James, if we could start with you.
Sure. Well, I've been in healthcare for 30 years. I started out in revenue cycle management. My father owned a chain of rev cycle companies. Back in those days, we didn't call them rev cycle, we called them billing services back in those days.
Yes.
So I learned about medical rev cycle just right out of high school. In fact, I used to go with the sales teams as a subject matter expert until we opened up a office in a remote location, and that's when I first got drafted into sales. And from there, I spent 10 years working for a well-known provider of rev cycle management software as an application specialist. And then after that, I spent another 16 years at NextGen Healthcare Information Systems, where we did electronic health records, revenue cycle management software, and then full-blown outsourcing of revenue cycle management. So today, I specialize in helping healthcare organizations with complex B2B sales processes improve their sales.
Great. Jane, what about you?
So I too have a 25, 30-year career. But my background is in media, and so I started in the trade show, B2B trade show world, selling trade show space, and spent about 12 years doing that. From there, I leaped over to digital media and worked in the newspaper space for about 7 years, both directly for a division of the Seattle Times Company as well as a consultant for a number of years. And from there, after that stint, which was a ton of fun, I went back into the B2B space and joined a company called MedTech Media, which has since been acquired by HIMS and is now HIMS Media. So I joined them in 2011 up until about a little less than a year ago, where I was recruited to join Xtelligent Media. And so, crossed paths with James a few months ago through his book because I found that as a very strong resource in driving some of the change that I needed to within the sales team over here.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting. We actually have a synergy here as well, because I was an advertising director for many years, and so this conversation we're going to have and go into right now related to prospecting is a life that I lived as a sales and advertising director, and that was a long time ago, but back then, prospecting was a smile and dial process, right? Or face-to-face, pounding the pavement. And of course, technology has really changed the art of prospecting. I think when you talk about prospecting, no matter what culture you're in, prospecting, I think for even the best salesperson is many times the most daunting and the scariest and the most fear-based thing that they do. At least that was always my impression as an advertising director and a sales manager. So let's talk about that prospecting. Every salesperson, do they love it? Do they hate it? Is it scary? And then let's move into prospecting now in the era of technology.
Sure. So in management parlance, we usually address that problem thinking about or calling it skill or will. That is, if we've got a rep that is having a challenge with prospecting, which is probably the least favorite function, right?
Yeah.
Of all the tasks that we do as salespeople, that's probably the least favorite. We got to look, all right, well, is it just they don't know how and that's why they're hesitating, or is it a will problem? They can't make themselves do it. And as a manager, you hope it's just they don't know how, because that's an easy thing to fix. You can just train it. If it's they're not willing to, and I'm saving a lot of space here, but I would just say you got to look at what the underlying reason for the hesitation is. And what I can tell you is in most cases, they haven't quite connected the dots of how the solution that we're selling actually makes the client's life better. And if once we make that connection and they can understand that by prospecting the client, by helping them out, that it's actually a service, right? Then the hesitation to reach out tends to go away. An analogy that you could think of is I live on a mountain, and we had a fire on our mountain not long ago, and there was my neighbor. He said, "Man, someone was banging on my door," and I said, "I have a no soliciting sign. Don't you understand?" And so he ignored the door, and then the doorbell was ringing. Nothing. Finally, his neighbor came to the back door and said, "Hey, our mountain's on fire. We need to evacuate." So in that case, he's really not mad that you interrupted him, right? Because you're helping out. So once we understand that the thing that we do, that we're helping the client, is serving them, then usually that hesitation goes away. It doesn't change the fact that we have to interrupt them just the way my neighbor did. But we're helping them, and once they understand the message, they're appreciative of that. So usually by addressing those two things, you can usually take that hesitation away.
Jane, your staff loves prospecting, right?
Oh, yes, that's my favorite thing to do, Carol. Right. No, I have to agree with James. I mean, as he was talking, I was thinking back to, if you had told me when I graduated from college that I would have a very successful career in sales and sales management, I would have told you, you've been into something funny, because that's not me. But the gentleman that convinced me to try sales positioned it exactly as James just did. He said, don't think about it as cold calling people. Think about it as you've got something that's going to help them do their business better. You're helping people. And, when I thought about it like that and I reframed it, it really, I can do that. I can't sell anything to anybody, but I certainly can help people. Career-wise, it is a necessary part of the job. How do you do it effectively, and learn and adjust to make sure that you have the biggest impact you can?
So technology, smartphones, email, social media, automated voicemail, all of these tools and just the era that we live in have changed prospecting, obviously. How has it changed it?
Well, and going back even farther, maybe just to throw the internet in there too, right?
Yeah, the internet.
It's made prospecting harder is the short answer to that question. And the reason for that is that the amount of messages that we're getting from all these different channels is absolutely unbelievable. I think I just read a study a couple of weeks ago that said we're now exposed to about 11,000 branding messages of one kind or another a day. It's just insane. So you don't get hit with that many messages a day without building up a defense system for that, right? And so that's a barrier that we have to deal with as salespeople when we're prospecting. And the interesting thing is when you survey sales managers and salespeople about, hey, knowing that there's messaging overload going on right now, what's your strategy? 9 out of 10 of them will tell you that they're just going to do more. That's the strategy. And yet that's the very thing that's causing the challenge, right? You see, there's an irony there that we're just going to do more of the thing that's actually causing the problem. So the solution, of course, we need to use all the channels, and of course the golden rule of marketing is you go where the customer is. So if they're on social, then we need to be on social. If they're less active and they don't use LinkedIn, then we're going to use the channel that they're good at. If that happens to be a trade show or that they happen to read certain magazines, then that's where we want to be. But I think one of the key things around this area is that a lot of us get this shiny object syndrome, right? That is, we're so thinking, oh, hey, this new tool that I can buy, this marketing automation tool is going to solve the problem, or it's going to make life easier, that we fall back and we don't actually do the things that are actually the highest leverage things that can be done. We lose sight of that. And that's, I think, in most organizations I go into, probably 80%, they're suffering from this. Yeah, they're hoping that their marketing automation and their more messages strategy is going to compensate, and they haven't even gotten to the most basic, fundamental, highest leverage things like targeting yet. And so they really would be better off putting a little thought into a couple of really high leverage strategies as opposed to just trying to pump out more messages with a new automation system.
Jane, what are your thoughts on this?
It is a challenge. I mean, we were just had some sales training this morning, where we were reinforcing with the team that it takes a minimum of 11 touches to get somebody to respond, typically, and more sometimes. So similar to what James said about being where the client is, I mean, I stress, please don't hide behind email. Email is, you're reaching out to people who are so busy. Everybody's trying to do more with less, right? So we're really trying to partner with, our clients and be an extension of their teams. So, we're not using as much automation, at the level that we should. I am a big fan of less is more in terms of making sure that we target the right people at the right time with the right message. So if I can leverage automation in a way where I know someone's engaging with a certain section of my site and get to them, at a time when I know they're looking at maybe an event that we're producing or at a specific media property that we have that they're straight really relevant to. That's the highest engagement we're going to get, and when we really have a really high connect rate. But so we're leveraging that, but you still have that day-to-day grind of making sure that you're hitting in different ways, in a meaningful way, and not, being and trying to not be persistent without being annoying.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to What's My Tagline, and my guests today are speaker and author James Muir and Jane Bogue of Extelligent Media, and we're talking about prospecting in a technology era. So James, I would love to learn from you, and I think our audience would too, just from a high-level standpoint. You wrote this book, The Perfect Close. Obviously, the process of prospecting is germane to getting to the close. Talk a little bit from a high level about what you recommend from a prospecting standpoint, and does technology play a role in that?
Oh, definitely technology plays a role. In fact, I was going to say, tack on to what Jane said there, is that, one of the things that sometimes gets forgotten is that, social media and these other electronic tools are really phenomenal at engaging at the top of the funnel and getting people familiar with us before we engage them actually. But sometimes what gets lost is when we actually engage, we want to remember the goal is to take them from an online conversation to a real live conversation as soon as you can, right? We want to get on the phone with them. We want to get face-to-face with them. That's where the real value conversation is going to happen. We're not going to, we don't close deals tweeting back and forth. That's not going to happen. But once we get engaged with them, then we want to just bring that offline as fast as we can. In terms of my message around prospecting, well, there's data out there that tells us what activities from a prospecting perspective are actually the highest leverage activities. And I mentioned one of those earlier. I call the four things market, message, medium, and motivation, those four things. And when we say market, well, all we're really talking about is targeting. And in fact, when asked about these challenges that we've been talking about, and people have asked me, well, what's the single biggest thing I can do to improve sales. And being a author of a best-selling book on closing, you might think that my answer to that would be closing, but it really isn't. That the single most effective thing you can do to increase sales is to only sell to ideal candidates, right? And the reason for that is everything else is downstream from there, right? So no amount of messaging or computer automation or brute force effort can compensate for selling to the wrong prospect. So because with the wrong prospect, all those other efforts are going to fall on deaf ears. It's garbage in, garbage out. So just getting that one thing can make a huge difference. And Carol, I know you know Hill Rom, who makes beds and furniture in the healthcare space. And so Hill Rom, just by changing the accounts that their sales team chose to focus on, they didn't do anything else, didn't change anything else. They added $70 million in revenue in a single year.
Wow.
So, targeting it, as simple as that sounds and as obvious it sounds, right, even though it's nothing new, it in and of itself is a super high leverage strategy. So I want to make sure that before we start engaging in a ton of messaging, either outbound calling or whatever it is we're doing, that we're really aiming at the right target market.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that, and Jane, I appreciate your thoughts on this too. I think it's so interesting that this idea of taking what I would call the old sales axiom of, hey, the more fishing poles you have in the water, the more bites you're going to get, kind of thing. That it's not just a simple math formula like it kind of used to be. It used to be a pretty simple math formula. You generally knew your targeted universe, and just kind of cast a wider net. And now it seems like you're actually using like specialty flies. You're tying your own flies to get a specific kind of fish.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
At least that's what I'm thinking. Jane, what about you?
Oh, definitely. I think that, we've got a pretty deep repository of product, but we have very few clients that buy all of it. So you really do need to be clued in on exactly, to James's point, like who are the people that are the right people to be calling on. So, because I think defining the right client base is critical in terms of focus, or you can just, run off into left field really easy.
So James's book, The Perfect Close, when you read that book, I'm sure there were lots of them, but what were one or two aha moments that you had?
So for me, and I'll speak specifically to what I was facing coming into a relatively young organization, is I think fundamentally there was a lot of things that James, had put in writing that were fundamental to how I grew up in sales in terms of values and integrity and really, the driver, of being a partner to your clients and wanting to really help them. That comes through, and it really does. That was one of the things that jumped off the page at me right out of the gate. Is if if your motivation is money, the clients are going to see through that, a million miles away. So you need to have your motivations in the right place. But I think where his book has really helped my team, and we're still in the process of going through it and applying it. So I bought it for everyone on my team. I've doubled the size of my
required
team
reading,
since I joined. I just had a conversation with one of my reps this morning about meeting planning and how important that is. But it brings structure to how we approach the sales process. So his book is really the process that I've embraced for the team in order to bring some definition and bring a path to for them to follow as they go down this road.
James, your motivation for writing The Perfect Close and obviously quite a bit devoted to this the art, I think, the art of prospecting. Anecdotal? This seems anecdotal and personal to you as a salesperson yourself. That this is a process that you've thought long and hard about.
Yeah, well, so I'm an accidental salesperson.
Accidental salesperson. Oh my gosh, that'd be a great tagline too. I'm an accidental salesperson.
There you go. See, we're all in the same club. So I started out as an operations person, right, in a family-owned rev cycle business, right, and so they would need me to help them with sales. And then when we acquired a business in another area, we needed an operations person who could also sell. And so I ended up getting drafted, right? So I'm basically this technical guy, but in sales now, and I'm a very type A person, so you can only imagine what that was like. And in fact, I had created this ridiculous schematic of the sales process that said, customer's going to do this, I'm going to do this. And I would literally give that to customers, say, this is your part, you're going to do this right now. So a little over the top, but I found myself hesitating when I was with clients of knowing the right time to ask for an advance or to move the sale forward in some way. And so I had no one to rely on for that. So I ultimately started reading all these different books, and I never did find the perfect thing, but I ultimately came up with the 2 magic questions that are the perfect close. And that's essentially how I put that together. And then later, I just used it myself. So I was sort of selfish for many years, and then as I started to manage my own teams, I recognized this pattern. I said, oh, this guy's having the exact same challenge that I had. Or very often, subject matter experts that are forced into sales positions in some way. They're forced to go on some sales meeting. They say that they hate sales, but they're in these situations where they have to do some selling. What I have found is that this is the thing that makes it easy for them, because they feel like they're literally, sometimes they'll say, oh, I'm going to the dark side when they have to get into sales. And the truth is, that's just a misunderstanding of what selling is. Selling is serving. And once you understand that you're serving the client and then you're just helping the client, then that sort of I'm gone to the dark side by selling goes away. And instead of going into a meeting thinking with your hand out, thinking, what do I get out of this? If you just get off yourself for a minute and focus on how you can help and serve the customer, the money will take care of itself. You don't have to worry about that part. So getting off of that will make the whole interaction much, much better. And the customers pick up on that, just like Jane said, and that makes the whole experience better.
Are there any, getting back to our main topic about technology and prospecting, are there any, and maybe we've thrown a few out there, I guess, but what are, if any, the positives, I guess, about technology? I mean, obviously, James, you were saying it's amazing. That's an amazing number you threw out about how many times a day we're hit with a branding and messaging. But are there any positives for the salesperson from a prospecting standpoint?
Oh, it's hugely positive, actually. Yeah. You shouldn't get you don't take my comment wrong. Those tools are awesome.
Yeah. They are. Yeah.
And yeah, the magic of social media, for example, is that you can touch them and engage them in a positive value-add way without interrupting them. And so that starts the process on a much better foot than just interrupting them, right? I mean, even if your house is on fire, it still, right, takes 3 knocks before the guy goes to the back door and I let him in and go, thank you, right? But social media does that a lot more gracefully. It just takes a little bit longer, but it does allow us to warm up the sale in a way that just didn't even exist, 5-10 years ago. But I can look and see if they're sharing stuff on social media. I can engage with that. I can like it. I can comment on it, all of those things. And then social media also allows us to target and see who we're working with a whole lot better than we could ever do before, right? We have to basically stuck with society rosters and things like that in the past. And social media lets us see and engage that person at a much higher level than we have in the past. So yeah, you should not think that I'm an anti-tech person, because I'm very pro that way, and I use many tools, with my clients and myself. So it's actually a blessing to be able to. I think it's actually easier in that sense than it has been in times past to engage clients, because before we essentially had one channel. We had direct mail and the phone, and that was maybe trade shows. Right, those are the channels that we were using. Now we've got a lot more options.
Yeah, it's definitely, I totally agree with you. It's definitely increased the opportunity side of prospecting, albeit, being sensitive, I guess, to the fact that people are more overwhelmed with messaging than ever before. Your point that a lot of companies have adopted, more outreach is better, but perhaps not. Jane, what are your thoughts?
I think if my sales team listened to this, they would be remiss if I didn't say it is. I think it's a little more frustrating from the ability for a prospect to avoid you. But
they can dodge.
It demands a lot. Right, and it demands a lot more creativity. And again, if we come at this from the angle of we're really trying to help the client, we've got a lot more ways to learn about what their goals and objectives are now than we ever did 20, 30 years ago. We can do a thorough almost a needs analysis, but really just do a thorough, analysis of the client in terms of what they're trying to do, how they're positioning themselves, where they're marketing, what they're targeting, so that when we come at this, we've got a pretty strong basis for how we can help them. So it just is a way of engaging people through those multiple touch points and really getting creative and the way that we're, that we're able to drive a response and drive engagement.
Just to pile on to what Jane said there is two things that she said in there that are really relevant is, one, we've got the different channels, so you can do what's called a combo. Instead of just doing one channel, we can actually maximize our impact by touching all, 3 or more channels. We could hit them on social, we could hit them with the phone, we can hit them with the email, and then that creates a much different feeling when the client gets touched those 3 times. They're like, oh, it's much more memorable to them. And so there's a book out there called Combo Prospecting, actually, that Tony Hughes is the author, and it's excellent about talking about the dynamic of using that. It's a very effective strategy. So you can, but a lot of salespeople are only using one. So that's something that Jane said. And the other thing is that our ability to research gets right back to that messaging that we were just talking about a little bit ago. And it means that when we finally do engage with those different channels, we're using a message that is far, far more effective than just a generic one-size-fits-all kind of a message.
And I think it's also interesting, and you guys have Jane alluded to it, and as did you, James, that social media, I think, allows you to get sort of a read, I think, more or less, on the person that you're prospecting, right? Because you see what they care about, and you can get more in tune as to what they believe are their challenges and what they do. And so you almost get a better understanding through social media, what they're tweeting, what they're publishing on Pulse on LinkedIn, as to what their concerns are.
Oh, 100%, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Jane.
No, mining social media, mining, Google and setting up alerts and being current with your clients, I think is all the benefits of technology.
I was just going to say, go to LinkedIn, go to look at recent activities, see what they're sharing, and then boom, now you get a real good sense of what's important to that person. And then at the same time, you're right there. You can just like what they do, we can engage them with a comment, and suddenly not only are we smarter, but we're also kind of engaging and move the ball forward a little bit.
Yeah. James, Jane, believe it or not, we are all out of time today. I want to thank you for chatting with me on this topic.
Hey, what fun. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah, this was great, Carol. Thank you.
Great. You can learn more about James Muir and his book, The Perfect Close, at www.puremuir.com. And be sure to follow him on Twitter at the RCM Guy. You can learn more about Jane Bogue at extelligentmedia.com and follow her on Twitter at Jane in Maine. You can share your thoughts or comments on Twitter at #What'sMyTagline or visit the program page on healthcarenowradio.com. Have a topic related to our show you want to hear about? Or are you an expert who'd like to be on the show? Reach out to me on Twitter at Carol Flagg or email me at carol@healthcarenowradio.com. Until next time, I'm Carol Flagg, and I would like to know, what's your tagline?